Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Spark Faith Podcast. I am Dr. Chris Sargent, and I have a really unique and inspiring guest with me today. She has a list of degrees a mile long. This is Temeko Richardson, a seasoned executive producer, director, writer, right? A filmmaker, y'all. She's known for her inspirational films that combine not only business acumen with artistic vision. She has earned 8 awards already. Her latest film is called At the Cross, and it delves into some pretty controversial issues around the traditional church versus a more modern church. How do churches resonate with youth and contemporary culture? And her film really captures some really interesting issues within the church in a very fearless way, but also in a very gentle way. And so we are going to get to talk a little bit about traditional versus the modern church, some main issues in the traditional church, entertainment in the church. Should the church have entertainment? Should it be that? Should it just be programs? Embracing different types of people from the place of love and grace. And then we're going to talk about something a little bit even more controversial, and that is female leadership in the church. So, Temeko, I just welcome you to the podcast. It's so cool that you reached out, and I'm so excited to have you here today.
Oh, thanks. And it's great to be on the podcast. I think you're doing really good work with all the other shows that you've done thus far. And I look forward to great things from this podcast.
Oh, thank you. So let's talk about the struggles of the church, traditional versus modern. What does that mean? I'm not sure what that means. And I'm definitely, my audience might not know. What is a traditional church versus a modern church? How do you make that distinction?
I think everyone is more well, I'll say that people that started out going to church as kids, they are more inclined to understand the traditional church in terms of what goes on, what the normalcies are within the church, like the standard hymns, the preacher preaching the sermon or the liturgy, going through communion, that whole process, the choir singing, ushers ushering, taking offering, just the normal thing that you would find in church, especially for any of the individuals who are in that time frame of, let's say, I don't know, 40 and up. Like we know that
sure.
as a traditional church. We also know that the traditional church also had not regulations, but there were some things that you just didn't have to say about behavior within the church, as well as behavior as it relates to what goes on in the church, as well as being a representative of the church and representative of God and the kingdom. So that is kind of like your tradition. There were certain things that you just didn't have to tell people they shouldn't do. They just knew that they shouldn't do it. And I think the modern church is more, does more to market to people in terms of membership rather than kingdom living. So anything that's done as it relates to just making sure people get to the church. So, all these types of things they have out there, like, back to church weekend, invite your neighbor to church, that kind of thing. It's like you're asking them to come to church, but you're not asking them to come to Christ, which are two different things.
Absolutely.
And I think we're more in a marketing generation than we are in terms of a kingdom building generation than right now in terms of church.
Okay. Is that good? Are we getting people into church, and are they shifting, or are we just getting people to church, like to the mall?
Yeah, so I think it also depends upon the leader or what we call the shepherd of the church. There are certain individuals that are say the pastors or the leaders of the church, who can bring people. The people come to the church because they hear a word and they're more inclined to join the church to continue to get the word, to get closer to God and build a stronger relationship with God, And then there are also leaders of churches who want to entertain the people to bring them in. But at that point, the entertainment has to keep them there. And it's a hope and a prayer that they see beyond the entertainment and want to join the church and get a closer relationship to
And
God
see what's behind the entertainment
and
and
see what's behind the entertainment. Yep.
see what's under the entertainment.
Right.
What do you feel like those pastors, when I shifted from a more liturgical church to a more, I guess you would call it a more modern church or a non-denominational church, one of the things that did pull me in was the music, right? But I quickly saw the scripture below it, but I had grown up in church. So how does somebody who didn't necessarily grow up in church see that from the heavenly perspective or from the Christ perspective?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, I mean, now we have what we call praise and worship teams in
Right.
churches. That's very common. Um, and I think a lot of that has to do with who the praise and worship leader is that is leading the actual song. Because even though they're praise and worship leaders, at the end of the day, most of them are getting paid. So it's a gig for them. And I think that people don't necessarily understand that. But most of them are getting paid. But some of them are what we call anointed, in terms of they would bring it back to the scripture,
Hmm.
bring it back to practical living to help people understand the song and how that relates to a scripture, a lesson in the Bible, or anything practical living. And I think that is very important if you're going to lead from an entertainment base. If you don't have that, it's a little sketchy.
Yeah, well, it's just harder, right? It's harder I would think it would be harder for the potential unchurched person to really understand the bigger message of the church if it's not that way, right?
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of it is that I don't think that we recognized before the pandemic how many people are really unchurched.
Mm,
Um, because at the end of the day, people saw the church as a place to go on Sundays, nothing past Sunday. But then you're really, 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 I won't call them spiritual people, but you're really dedicated people to the church. They would go to everything that would fall on the Wednesdays, the Bible studies, they would go in person. But at the end of the day, there was always a group that was left out, and that was the completely unchurched. So if you have a group that's completely unchurched, then that group will tend to lean towards um, a more secular um, artist, and them claiming that they are now doing gospel music. So they will cling to that, but they're completely unchurched. So they don't have a clue that even though these songs are supposedly being now in this particular gospel realm, that at the end of the day, they don't have a real meaning for that individual, because they're just really selling records. So right. So um
doesn't that
you have
lend itself though to, okay, it could go either direction though, right, Temeko?
mhm.
That those gospel songs might lead somebody to want to know more, but it also might be even a bigger turnoff. Like, oh, you're just using this as a marketing ploy for your
Well, you know
records.
what? A lot of people don't really understand um how they're being led, because people are led by their emotions, right?
Right.
And they're also led by their allegiances, which is why we have to always be careful with that word fan, like sports fan or whatever fan, because the word
Hmm.
fan is actually short for fanatic. So if you
Right.
are a fanatic of anything, that's a problem, because you should not be a
It's like an
fanatic.
obsession.
It's Yeah, you should not be obsessed with anything.
Except maybe
So
Jesus. That would be all right.
yeah, Jesus is fine, but yeah, you shouldn't be obsessed with anything in this world. So that is the problem that people run into, is that they run into this whole concept of being a fan of someone and anything that they do, that they can't see logic, right? Logic is not on the table. So we have that, and that means that those people are allowed to do anything and everything and get away with it. And I think we're finding out um across many spectrums right now is that how potent that logic is in terms of not holding people accountable for the influences that they have on people and the power that they have on people in society. So I think that as church leaders, when you have individuals like that in your coming to your church, you have to be careful with that, and that you always bring it back to the kingdom, the scripture, and everything based on God, not the person who is the
Right.
artist.
Agreed, agreed. And I also think that for the unchurched, I feel like, and this is a reason to come to church. A lot of them may or may not even understand like their central value system, right? I tend to believe that values and beliefs, with Jesus in the center, right, on in concentric circles, right, that influences our thoughts influence our emotions influence our behavior, and then our behavior influences our results in our world. And if you're not familiar with the inner circle, then you can just be swayed by anything that comes along.
And that is very true. And that's also very dangerous, right? Because especially with the era we're in of conspiracy theories, right?
Oh my
Uh,
gosh. For sure.
and between conspiracy theories and social media, so people only have like a 30-second to 90-second time span. They're only reading, let's say, 160 words max. um, and they'll draw conclusions just from that. They don't go to do full research. They don't do any fact finding. It's whomever
It's
is the
whatever's on
person that can,
TikTok.
whatever's on TikTok, whoever's your influencer says, and they just go from that, and they don't understand the whole story. So it's a very dangerous time right now in terms of that.
So that brings us back to, is it is it beneficial then, do you think, for the modern church to be using some of those things to pull people in? And I don't know if there are statistics around that about people coming to Christ with that. It's kept me in the church. It absolutely influenced me in a positive way. I have such a deep um growth place. When I entered the non-denominational church, I just exploded with my love for everything God and Jesus. But I'm not so sure that I just don't know. I'm just putting my ignorance out there on how successful that actually is.
Yeah, I think it all depends on what the church is about, right?
Yep.
So you have church leaders that are about the entertainment. Like, I mean, you have church leaders who are entertainers in terms of they are singers, they're part of bands, they're part of groups, and then they're also pastors. So they're going to have a group of individuals that follow them because of their success as an artist, right? So you have that type. You also have the I'll say um the more traditional leader or pastor who is focused like Bible teaching and focused
Hmm.
on Bible, and not just feel good, but like the truth of the Bible, all aspects, good, bad, and correction. Um, and then you have, that third category where they're just going to lean in towards whatever your issues are. So if your issues or your marginalization is your focus and that's what makes you tick, then there are churches that focus only on that. So for example, like a social justice minister who like fights marches and all that kind of things, like
Hmm.
there are churches or ministers who are pastors that that's their thing, and people gravitate to that because they believe that they're always marginalized, and um, they get the short end of the stick all the time. They fight for whatever that group is, and you have preachers like that. So it depends on who the leader and the shepherd is in terms of where they go with that.
I kind of love that, actually. I just had this thought, like, actually, maybe the statistics don't matter, and maybe it's more important um, that we recognize, you and I, maybe, and others in our shoes recognize that God, first of all, can use anything and anybody, and speaks in ways that only Like he speaks to me in a way that only I could understand, that you would look at that and go, that doesn't have anything to do with me, but it's me meeting God and where he meets me in my own space, right?
Right. And God meets you where you are, definitely.
Right. And he
Um,
meets everybody else too in
mhm,
ways that you and I may or may not understand.
right. But when he meets you, you got to make sure that you are in the position to be open to have the meeting with him. And you
Absolutely.
have to also be encouraged and be led in a fashion such
Into
that
that
you
direction.
understand the direction and you understand everything about God and the kingdom. So, just trying to learn it on your own, or just saying, God spoke to me in this rap song and then that's it. What happened after that? Like something had to have happened after that, right? So I think
Right.
that, um, like you said, like it's not about how you get there; it's what happens once you get there.
Agreed. Agreed. Like,
Right.
how does God use, okay, I heard this rap song. I want to know more about God, and then I want to serve him.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if they can be used that way, then those are positive things. And entertainment in the church can be looked at very positively. But what about, do we hedge into prosperity gospel? Do we hedge into some of the more controversial places when we make it about entertainment or positivity or feel good or some of those things?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the Bible is not really about making you feel good throughout the entire
Oh,
Bible.
I don't think it makes me, I mean, right. Me, it's like a mirror. Oh, yeah, I'm just as ugly and
Yeah.
just as
Um,
much of a sinner as the Israelites.
exactly. So the feel good of the Bible is that it gives you hope. It helps you understand the
Right.
faith that you must have. Um, um, and it gets you through your obstacles if you believe, and you understand that at the end of a crisis, or while you're in the crisis, that it won't always be the crisis, and that there are always lessons to learn. So I think that is the key there. But from a prosperity gospel perspective, I think we have to be careful, because a lot of people that are unchurched because of snippets they see about specific pastors who, quote unquote, are prosperity preachers, or I don't even know what that label is. But um but at the end of the day, they see snippets, or they see individuals who come across with, their designer labels. Now they have stylists, all kinds of things, right?
Right.
But they have these designer labels and stylists because, one, they most of them can afford it, um and two, because that also draws people to them. So
Right.
everything's a marketing thing, right? So for whatever reason, um if someone's has a Gucci bag, or they are styled by some important stylist that is a stylist to the stars, or they work out with a trainer that has trained one or two celebrities, that makes them important, and it makes them influential to people, which I that's crazy to me. But for some people, that's what they need in order to believe that people are successful. So they draw to that. But what they clearly don't understand is that the people that are the most successful don't walk around in any type of designer clothes. They don't have celebrity trainers. They don't have any stylists. Like, they don't do any of that. Um,
Mm-mm.
but that's also marketing, right? um and so I think we just need to be careful with that, because for whatever reason, people believe that that is a success point. So most of those people that do that, they have their own money. Those particular preachers and leaders, they usually have their own money that have nothing to do with the church of which they pastor,
Right.
because they do conferences where they get money for every
Where they
conference
get
that
paid, they write
they
books,
get paid, they write
right.
books, they have other ventures, they have real estate, they have other things that they do in order to collect money outside of that church.
Right.
So I think that in terms of labeling someone as a prosperity leader or preacher, that's a little shady in that sense,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, most of them don't fall into that category. And then the other thing is that we have individuals, the unchurched and the people who just always want to have a problem with the church. You're going to have that, right? And I'm not talking about
That's
people who have been through church hurt, because that's a whole nother conversation.
that's a whole other conversation, which we can have
Right.
at another day. I don't think that's what we're here for, but
Right.
I mean, I've certainly had church hurt, but
Right. I think we all have experienced church hurt if we were a part of any organization within church.
I think so.
Um, but yeah, so but a lot of people have something negative to say about church regardless. So the prosperity gospel um philosophy is also of, individuals that don't understand business, right? So if you don't
True.
understand business, you'll see that taking an offering or having people tithe or first fruit, any of those things, you'll see that as greed. And it's really not, because at the end of the day, the church is a business, because the church has to function in order to pay the lights, pay the people that work for the church, and do all the things it does in the community, including feeding the hungry, providing shelter, providing any other types of initiatives that help out with housing for the homeless, any of those types of initiatives, even job fairs, any of those types of things require money, and the church has to function. So I think that people just need to be careful with what their meaning is of prosperity preaching.
Agreed. I completely agree. So let's shift gears just a little bit. What about how can the church, I think we sort of touched on this, although how does the church reach out to sort of the marginalized? I mean, you put this in, it was in your movie pretty strongly. How do we reach out to the marginalized people? Maybe the uh the trans, the LGBTQ, like all of that. How do we reach out to all the marginalized people that really feel like they don't belong in church? And they
Um,
already have so much guilt and shame around their identities, and just how do we make that make sense? And how can we, I think your sweater actually says it all. We just love them, right? How do we bring them in and help them understand that God loves them?
so I think that we have to, and I think it's more so, like you said in the movie, in terms of reaching people with love. Um, you teach love first, and you use love as that tool for correction instead of the Bible, and to focus on judgment and hate, right? So, um, traditionally, I think that all churches have gone through this whole process of um, marginalizing people by their sins, and making certain sins in a higher category than other categories. I don't know how that works. Because no, there's no uh,
There's not a list in the
there's
Bible
not
that
like
says
a
that this
picture
is
in the
worse
Bible,
and this is
right?
right. Like there's not.
Yeah, there's no
Everything.
diagram depicting the level of sins, and if you get to hell first, then like there's none of that in the Bible, right?
Right.
So it's all there. These are the sins. That's it. So if you're jealous, you're gossiping, you're all of that, envious, adultery, fornication, it all falls in that boat, right? Um, so I think that traditionally that people have uh, done more in terms of pushing people away because of the sin category,
Agreed.
rather than pulling people into church with love. And I think that that's
Agreed.
where you have to start. Um, but that doesn't mean that once you pull them in with love, that you accept their behavior and allow that behavior to be permeating throughout your church, because that's a whole nother ballpark, right? Um, because that's what I think that the problem is that come as you are, but be better, right?
Ah, I love that. Come as you are, but be better.
And I think that the message that was in the movie where it indicated, well, let's start with sinning less, right? So I think that's where we have to kind of start with all individuals that feel marginalized. And, it shouldn't be a moment of embarrassment for them to come to church, come to the altar, speak
Right.
to whomever the leaders are. It shouldn't be a moment of embarrassment. Because there are certain things that all people have done, right? So none of us are without sin. Some people just wear their sin more visibly than others, right? Because you have people that have done things as simple as, well, I won't say as simple, but you have people that have done things like lied on the application, right? An employment application, or right. I'm
Something
sure there's a lot
simple,
of people that's
right?
done that, right?
Right.
But that's a lie regardless, and nobody would know that, right?
Right.
But at the end of the day, we don't embarrass them because we don't know that that's happened, and they can go to the altar, they can repent of their sins, they can start telling the truth just like anybody else. So I think we have to treat everybody the same, and that is the key there. And then also we have to teach forgiveness. People need to be forgiving of others, and they need to forgive themselves. We can't hold people hostage for what they've done in their past, because we wouldn't want anyone doing that to us, right?
But we
So,
also can't hold ourselves hostage. And how
right.
many times have we, I think women too, and we're going to dive into women and how we can change this whole thing and why we're controversial in the first place. But I think that women tend to hold on to things and should ourselves and shame ourselves and live in this place of guilt and unforgiveness when God is already forgiven. And who are we, right, to do that?
And a lot of it has to do with the judgment of people in the church, right? So,
Absolutely.
right. So you already know, like, church folks are judgmental. They're so holy, but they're judgmental at the same time, right?
Right.
And it's like, pick a struggle, people, pick a struggle.
Well, it's the Pharisees' law, right? And the intent of the law and how Jesus brings it all about, right?
That's
It's
it.
so good. It's so good. It's so good. So, so one of the things that you like to champion, and of course, I am right here with you as I have just started at Denver Seminary as in a master's program specifically designed for women leadership, women in leadership in the church. This is certainly a spot that you are very passionate about. And could you just give us a quick outline as to the pros or why women shouldn't be in the church or why it's been that way for so long, the patriarchal view, and then tell us why you think what we can do to shift that and how we can do that in a gentle, godly way, as opposed to a more maybe I'm not sure I'm going to pick the right word, militant way. How can we do that in our godly selves as women, and how can we influence the church, and how can we change some of these things that we've just talked about? How can we be the champions of these other people? That was a lot.
Well, so let's
Let's
like
start with the
this.
patriarchal spot. Like, why can't
Yeah.
women? What's the matter with women in the church? I never knew. I knew there was a problem because I never saw any of us. Very rarely saw any of us up there. But go ahead.
Well, I think that, I mean, from my background, because my grandparents were both preachers and pastors. So, of course, my grandmother was a preacher and pastor. This was years ago. Um,
So she's an OG. That's amazing.
yeah. So, and then I want to say in the city of which they were in, there were probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 female pastors. So, from where I sit, that, like, all of this conversation about women not being in leadership or anything like that in a church, I don't know anything about that in terms
Right.
of how I've seen it, because I've always seen it. Um, and then from that perspective, even in the church I attend now, the Greater Allen AME, where our senior pastor is Reverend Elaine Flake, of course, female, and she was co-pastor with our pastor emeritus, the Honorable Floyd Flake. But even when he was in charge, he had female ministers leading things. Um, So yeah, so I've always known women to be leaders inside of the church, and there's a large consortium of women leaders inside of the church. Now I know that even though I attended AME church, I don't really consider myself AME because I grew up Pentecostal holiness, then United Holiness, um, then joined the Baptist church because it was convenient. Um, and they didn't hold church all day. Because
Preach.
that was the goal. It was like after growing up and being in all my grandparents' churches, um, with United Holiness, and it felt like you were in church like 7 hours, uh,
All day Sunday. Like that
all
was
day
part of
Sunday.
it. No wonder you had to eat giant fried chicken meals afterwards,
It
right?
was crazy. It was
Not trying
crazy.
to
Yeah, it
Do
was
you
all
think
kinds
there
of
is
meals. You had
right?
meals
Do
at
you think
breakfast. You had meals after lunch. It was crazy. I digress. But yeah, so in all of those churches that I was a part of, there was always a minister who assistant pastor, assistant associate minister, all of that in the church. Um so that has always been what I'm accustomed to. So all of this talk about women shouldn't be leaders in the church and blah blah blah, like I don't even understand that. Um because even at our women's conference, like there were female bishops. So uh, you know, I have no idea why we don't want women
right.
in the church. And here's what my thinking is. And I don't believe it to be patriarchal across the board. I believe there are certain old traditions that are in place in specific areas of the country
Or
that are
denominations.
and denominations that focus on males being in charge across the board. And I think that that is where you're seeing the problem. Um, and which is also good for non-denominational churches because non-denominational churches don't have to fall to any of those traditions, and they can have individuals which are women being pastors, leaders, associate ministers, whatever, in those particular churches. And then you also have certain affirmations that kind of have broken off from traditional Baptist churches, and they have their own, I don't know, committees and their own organizations, and they designate people however they want to in terms of being big leaders like bishops and things like that. And they have women that are bishops as well. So I think a lot of that has to do with where you are, and is it worth it to fight the battle where you are, or can you branch off and be more impactful in other places? Because sometimes the
Mhm.
fight really isn't yours at that place. The fight can mean that you can go somewhere else and be more impactful and be more purposeful. And I think that women in general, we tend to want to fight where we are rather than move and change and be more impactful somewhere else. Um, and that's going on right now, at the prior church that I used to be a member of, uh, where it has turned into a gender battle in terms of who's going to be the next pastor,
Wow.
when it shouldn't be that, because traditionally,
Why? It shouldn't be I mean, we see it in
yeah,
politics too. It shouldn't be a gender battle, period.
right. Well, and it shouldn't be a gender battle simply because especially because the individuals that are in position and are being looked at for that pastoral role all have more experience than the females that are applying. So, how do we make it gender based? And I think that the problem now that we face across the board is not just in church but everywhere, is if something doesn't look right, it's a gender problem, it's a race problem, it's
It's an
a
age
sexual problem,
problem.
it's an
Yeah,
age problem, it's always a problem. And every time it's not a problem. So we need to get past that, and we just need to be more inclusive of everyone in terms of women in the church and in these leadership roles. And I tell you why it also makes a difference. I think that was one of your questions. It makes a
yes,
difference
it is.
because women have more nurturing capacity than men.
Agreed.
So there's certain
We bring the
things that,
empathy.
yeah. So we lead with more empathy typically than men do. We also, uh, we also fall into different categories. Some women have the empathy, but they also have the stick to itiveness, where we
Mhm.
can focus on things and persevere. And then there's also the category, if you're kind of like have the type A, then you also are about your business. So we don't need to meander and, with this, all this, let me figure it out. Let me talk to the people, blah, blah, blah. We kind of know what it is, and we know how to present it. We know how to present it succinctly, and we can get it across, right? And we can help men who are, let's say, in higher positions be able to position ideas across the board, and like in terms of the trustee board, the deacon board, and all these other boards that happen to be at the church, to be more influential and get things done in a quicker manner. So that is why I believe that women should be in the church. The other reason that I think that women should be in the church is because, I don't know about your church, but my church is about, it feels like it's a 70-30, 80-20 ratio of who's attending the church. Um,
Yeah.
because it's men just typically don't go to church like women go to church, right? Um, so who's going to be there to reach them in terms of their particular needs? Because I don't care what
Agreed.
man does a conference on women need to heal and all the other stuff. They are not women, right? And
Right.
they do not know what goes on with women internally. So there are certain things that women specifically need that a male can't give them as a leader. And it's the same thing in terms of, um, like women's conferences, which is why most churches have to have like women's conferences that focus only on women. Men have a conference that focus on specifically men. And usually those are like once a year. But at the end of the day, there's 365 plus one this year, 366 days in a year. So if you focus on women and what their needs are 3 days out of that entire year, what happens the rest of that time? So
Yeah.
there has to be a
We're not served.
place where each group can be served within the church. And I believe that women should have that space.
You said it so beautifully. I want to ask you a quick question just to back up just a tiny bit. Do you think that there's a difference in the Black church versus a white church? And I don't want to be racist about this at all. That's not my intent. I just wonder if you feel like, or have you seen a difference? I grew up in an Episcopal church. We had we did have a female deacon, um, and that was, a long time ago, but definitely, and now some of the Episcopal churches actually have female rectors, but and I've grown up similar to you, right? I have seen women in leadership. I have seen women teach and preach, if you will, at every church, almost every church that I've been to, except for a couple. But do you think there's a difference in the Black and the white church at all in that?
So I've been to Lutheran, Episcopal, and Baptist churches that fall, within and they have mostly Caucasian individuals. And I've actually been to Catholic churches, and I've seen uh, uh, in Catholic churches, I've seen women in leadership positions, but that's
Mhm.
mostly in Canada, though, where
Right.
I've been to those places. Um, and then from the Lutheran side, I've seen female preachers in
Hmm.
churches on the Lutheran side. So I think it's really about the area where you live.
Okay. It's more
Um, I think it's
geography.
I think it's also geographical, right? So the places that I tend to go to, these places are, extremely liberal. New York, um, Canada, California. So very liberal places, um, where I've seen females in leadership churches, in the Caucasian churches, I should say. Um, in the Black churches, again, I think that has to do with your leader, because even in Texas, I've seen Dr. Marcus Crosby down in Houston. He has several women on his staff that are associate ministers and also preach on Sundays when he's not there, and they take leadership roles within the church. But he also had a background where when he went to seminary, who he saw in terms of the leaders in theology were actually women.
Wow.
Right. So
Okay.
like the Dr. Renita Weems and things of that and people of that nature who focused on like Old Testament theology. So when you are used to seeing those types of people who are the academicians inside of seminary as a male, you're not so hesitant to bring in females in the church. So I think that all of that has a shaping into terms of
Okay.
how people use it.
And so what I'm hearing you say is really this whole women in church thing has more to do with the geographical or kind of more conservative bend than any other potential issue.
Right. Because I don't think that
Okay.
it's a,
No,
it's not a whole biblical thing where you're like, oh my God, females can never be a pastor. Like I didn't read that in the Bible.
right. No,
Not there. So
no.
yeah, so I think we're making up things as we go, but this is America. That's what we do.
That's funny. So how do you feel like women, because we lead with empathy and nurturing, we can also instigate, if you will, including other people, maybe from a different perspective, right?
Yeah, I think that because women have typically been on the spectrum of not being able to be included in a lot of things and having a say, we should know more about or be more empathetic to individuals that feel as though they're not seen or
And
don't
heard.
have a say. And I think that
Hmm.
that is where we can help with bringing people in, um, and just being more kind to people. That's a big thing.
Yeah, it's your sweater, right? It's all about love.
It's all about love.
It's really all about the love. I love that. That's amazing. What else? Let's see. Where else do you see um women not taking a stand in the church? Where do you feel like, and how do you feel like we can step up into roles that we might not feel like we're qualified for? I mean, there's some statistics out there that if a man is going for a job, even if he doesn't have like 3 out of the top 10 or 5 out of the top 10 qualifications, he'll go ahead and right, he'll go for the job, but women will be like, "Oh, I'm not qualified." So how do we in the church, how do we look at some of the roles and say, yes, this has typically been held as by a guy, but I'm qualified to do that as well. How can we move into those spaces?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with also our backgrounds, right? So at the end of the day, the church seems to be focused on people who volunteer their time, right?
It's true.
Um, and who's less busy, one never knows. But because the church has a higher makeup of women, um, in specific areas, what you'll find they're going to do the things that cater towards the uh, the kitchen, the ushering, the all of those types of things. Well, I think what women need to be focused on in the church are the business side, right? Not HR, because that's typical female, right? So
Right.
let's just stop doing these typical female things, right? So we know all these females can sing. Yeah, we're good on that. Uh,
Church secretaries or church
church
admins,
secretary, the scheduler, the all of that, the admin,
executive assistants.
executive assistant. Like why do we keep doing these things? At the end of the day, let's step it up. Let's be in charge. Let's be the CFO of the church. Let's be the chief operating officer of the church. Let's be the chief facilities engineer of the church, right? And everything that has to go on with the building construction, organizational planning, dealing with the architects. Like, let's do those types of things. because at the end of the day, because it's not just about the church, but it also lends to your resume in helping you do other things outside of the church that can help your own family and um your financial outcomes elsewhere, right? By having that
Right.
type of experience. So yeah, I think that we definitely need to do that, because at most churches, you'll find that the CFO, the COO, the person is head of facilities, the person is head of security. Those particular groups within the church are usually all male.
It's true.
Sad,
It's
but
true.
true.
That is sad. It's almost like the same glass ceiling that we see in corporate businesses, right? Like it's the same. We just haven't punched through that and said, "Hey, wait a minute. I haven't, but like I know women who have run their own construction company for 20 or 30 years. Why wouldn't they be in a perfect position to do that
And especially when you're
for
dealing
a
with,
church?"
right. And for most churches, with all the things that you have to do, if you have to do one renovation, I don't know what it is where you are in Tennessee, but I know in the state of New York, if you do one renovation, oh my God, the amount of permits you got to get from the state, the city, the local municipality, um, all of that, dealing with the architects and the vendors, getting RFPs, all of that whole entire process, it's not simple, right? So
Mm-mm.
having individuals that can do that, and I think leading from a female perspective, I think that would be great too.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I have totally enjoyed our conversation today. What else would you like to tell people about women in leadership, about your movie, about what you have up and coming? Let's talk about At the Cross. Like everybody needs to jump on Amazon Fire, Amazon Prime and see that because it was great. It was a
Awesome.
great
I'm
it,
glad you
it
liked it.
I did
Um,
like it.
awesome. So basically, At the Cross is, as you mentioned, on Amazon Prime Video now. It actually launched the weekend of Easter.
I know it was so
Perfect
exciting.
timing. So it's basically a feature film. It's for the whole family can watch it, so it's
It
not
is.
anything that's R
Mm-mm.
rated or anything like that. But it
Not
takes the
even
whole,
close.
right. So it takes you basically through the lens of a bishop and or a past who's a pastor, and he faces some modern day dilemmas of the church in the face of trying to maintain the interest of the members, because as we talked about, that's also an issue, is keeping the people interested that are already there. And he's also trying to grow the church in the community, and he's trying to do that without leaning too much on trying to be relevant, but also keeping God's kingdom in mind. There's a side story there that I think that everybody will like, with the two sons. um,
Yep.
and it focuses on a lot of things that churches go through, and I think one of the other things that churches go through that they don't really do successfully, especially in the Black church, is succession planning.
Mm.
um, and so it goes through that, and we're dealing with that across the board, especially in the Black church. And when you have these denominations, some of them require pastors to leave at a specific age, but they don't allow them
Because
to.
that's biblical.
I'm not saying that the pastor should be there till he's 90, but what I am saying is that there should be it should be common sense that the pastor should be able, especially a pastor who's been there for over 20 years and has grown the church successfully and done a lot in the community. There should be a succession process that allows that pastor to indicate these should be the next coming pastors, have a few 3 to 5 years in order to groom them into that
Sure.
position, get them acclimated to the to the
That's
um to the parishioners, all of that whole process. But yeah, there's no succession planning in the church, which makes no sense because it is still a business, so it still has to run and function, right? So yeah, so it focuses on that. And then I have a short film called I Am Him, um, which I also produced, directed, and wrote. And that is going to be turned into a series. And we have it now with 3 awards since we first launched it in January into the film festival tour. So that's about two best friends who are navigating through life's challenges, and they're trying to uphold that mantra of they are okay. And they deal with the embarrassments that men don't like to address, like financial
Mm.
problems, health issues, relationship challenges, even sexual harassment on the male side, and making decisions that could change their whole financial impact and their livelihood based on compromising their manhood. Um,
Mm.
so all of that is in for that particular short film. And like I said, that'll have a series that will be launched in August is the goal there for that.
That's so
So
exciting. You
yeah.
found you're going to be able to launch that as a series. You also have um a channel, if you will, correct?
Yes. So on Amazon Fire and on Roku, there is the RLC Inspire Network. So we'll be launching specific shorts that will focus on health and wellness, also things related to sports, the whole impact of sports and Christ. All that will be on there as well. And we're launching that in the summer as well.
Oh my gosh, that's huge. Like you are so multi-talented. You're such an impressive woman and young. Oh my goodness. Like you have done so much for women, for the kingdom, for so many things. And I can't wait to have you back on here to see what the next project is
Yes.
or
Hopefully the next
whatever
project
else.
is bigger.
Y'all, bigger than a feature film. Come
Dream
on.
big. That's all we can do is dream big.
Absolutely, absolutely. Final words? Anything? Any
No,
wisdom that you'd like to impart?
I just hope that people seek God and seek the truth. They make sure they follow
Mhm.
biblical teaching and not just um centralized belief matching that seems to be out here in America. Um, and we need to make sure that we are focused on what God wants us to do, and instead of political agendas, and just keep God first.
Oh, yes. Yes. Keep God first. That's the goal of every day, right? It's just keep bringing it back, keep bringing it back, keep bringing it back.
Yes.
Temeko, thank you for your time and your energy and your love. Just oozes out through the camera so much. I love it. And I just want to, bless you and thank you for being with me today. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right.